Sahana vavatu, Sahanau bhunaktu, Saha Viryam Karavavahai, Tejasvinavaditam Astoma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily disagree with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So there's a question before us. Is free will an illusion? And the reason why we discuss this is it's the age-old philosophical question that has been bandied back and forward by many different philosophers contemplating this question. And I suppose there are three varieties of it. One variety is strong determinism. Strong determinism will say that everything is arranged in a causal string of events. And they will cite the fact that we are sitting here, but the cause of us sitting here will be, well, we can break it down into minutiae, but we could say the reason why we're here at all is because we took a biological birth. So our parents, in that sense, are the cause of us being here. Now, you see, of course, in Oriental thinking, the idea of even before is a causal arrangement. And so the characteristic about causality is taken that cause and effect are the same thing, just in different modified form. So, for example, if we use the analogy of a wave system in an ocean, the cause of a hollow is a peak, and the cause of the peak is a hollow, and so it goes on interminably. And then if we say, well, where did the parents come, and where did that genealogy come from, and all the rest of it, yes, we can trace the causality back to previous actions which have their effect now. But then you see, how far do you trace it back? Just from a biological point of view, we're tracing it back to an unknown area where there was certain conditions. And the causal conditions distinguish us between organic life and distinguish the organic life as such, whether it's a single cell proto-organism, or whether it is a sophisticated organism such as the human. We can trace it all back to certain conditions which are unknown. People guess at it, maybe volcanic activity, maybe a meteorite. These are some of the various suggestions. But then nobody really knows how combinations of amino acids can form very complex structures, so that we have within us the nucleotide of us. We have in the nucleus, we have the DNA, the deoxyribonucleic acid, our genome, if you will. And that is extremely complex and somehow seems to oscillate, some moves, there's no stagnation in it. Whereas a non-organic or inorganic thing, such as a machine, does not move unless there's an agent that moves it. So I was explaining a little earlier on the discovery of what's called Brownian motion, where somehow water is required, and within water, pollen seeds are crushed and then observed under a microscope and seen to move around, like dodgem cars in a fun fair, without the driver. And there seems to be no director in it. Seem to be moving almost randomly, but always moving. What is it that's making it move? What is the engine that's making it move? So we have to look for another cause. Ultimately, we can see Brownian motion is to do with molecules, and molecules are made from atoms. And the evidence of atoms in 1905, let's say, is because of this Brownian motion that is observed. Things are moving, things are active. We can distinguish something which is alive and something which is operating and requires some intelligent cause behind it to make it move. So when we talk about things like artificial intelligence, the reason why we put in the word artificial is because an intelligence has to sit behind it somehow. And it is a difference between a mere worm and a steam engine. This is Swami Vivekananda's example. Which is greater? The worm is greater because the worm has something special within it that we call life. And when we trace the causality back to it, in our Vedanta view, all of this life is really because there is a material cause, and then there is an efficient cause, and the efficient cause and the material cause are exactly the same. This is the peculiarity. There's no creation within it. There's no dualism in it, whereby there is a creator separate from a creation. And even though in the Vedanta philosophy we have dualism, Madhva's dualism, for example, there is still this intimate connection. There is still this efficient material cause that is not denied. So we don't say that something was created. We say something was projected. Even if we make the entity that is projecting something somehow separate. Because to the dualist who worships, there must be something separate to worship. What's the point otherwise? Now you see, there's no real difference between these three attitudes within Vedanta of dualism and Vishishtadvaita, qualified non-dualism, and absolute non-dualism, because all of them will postulate this efficient cause, material cause must be the same thing. That means the world that we see is a manifested version. The dualist says it's real. The qualified non-dualist says it's relatively real. And the non-dualist says, well, when you reach the absolute, it's gone completely. It's gone, it disappears. And the reason why it disappears is because it is something like an illusion. It's something like an appearance. Now, when we take up the subject of free will and use the deterministic camp, the opposite side of that would be that we have absolute freedom. In other words, that we can fully determine our destiny 100%. But that really wouldn't be true because it flouts the law of causation. And the law of causation is a law, but it's a law that is within a framework. It requires a framework of time, space has to be there, and this law of causation also has to be there. So there's a middle path. The middle path says that we are soft determinists. We recognize that it actually can be both. You cannot determinately say 100% everything is caused. And you cannot absolutely say that there's no scope for dealing with a flux, dealing with something that changes in a deterministic way, in a self-deterministic way, where a certain will is asserted, where free choice is there. Now, Swami Vivekananda is much more blunt about this, and I would like to read you a small passage. He says, every thought that you think is caused, every feeling has been caused. To say that the will is free is sheer nonsense. You can't put it more bluntly than that. So previously, somebody asked, well, is it yes or no? You don't have to do the work if you say yes or no. Swami Vivekananda is saying it's nonsense. Not only is he saying there's no free will, he says it's nonsense. But what does he mean? And to understand what he means, we have to find out what we mean by free and freedom and what we mean by will. Now you see, Schopenhauer was a great philosopher who got all his inspiration from Buddhism, Hinduism, or the Vedic religion. In fact, he actually states something most outstanding, most profound, and I have the quotation here somewhere, but he says, in the whole world, there is no study, he says, so beneficial and so elevating as that of the Upanishads. It has been the solace of my life, and it will be the solace of my death. But you see, in his philosophy, Swami Vivekananda makes a point of disagreeing. He says, will is entirely personal. Therefore, we cannot go with Schopenhauer at all, he says. Will is a compound. It's a mixture of the internal and the external. Suppose a person were born without any senses. He would have no will at all, because will means I mobilize a desire. A simple example. If I wish, will and want, wish being the same thing. If I want to move a chair from A to B, the chair has to be there in the beginning. And for me to cognize the chair, all information has to go through the senses, and the brain then goes and analyzes it and makes a response, and by experience identifies it as a chair, and then I can weigh up the advantages of how to move the chair. But the weighing up of it is personal, no doubt, but there's no freedom within it. I only have several choices before me, and I cannot make the chair into an elephant, and I'm stuck with the conditions that are presented to the senses. So you cannot say something is free when it's bound by temporal, spatial, causal conditions. And therefore, we have to say that there is a determinism going on. Wherever you take it, there's always a change of cause and effect going on somewhere. In the Raja Yoga, Swami Vivekananda points out that the causality understanding that we have comes from the Sankhya philosophy. And so he gives us a little bit of information about it in his introduction. He says, according to the Sankhya philosophy, the genesis of perception is as follows. The affections of external objects are carried by the outer instruments, eyes, ears, that happen to be on the outside of the skin. Even if you take a cell, a very primitive cell, the eyes and ears, so we can say correspondingly, in other words, all the information is there on the skin. It is the membrane of the cell that is the intelligent thing, that brings in the information, that makes the selection through a very complex screening process and delivers it in an epigenetic way to the nucleus of the cell, namely the DNA. And although the DNA doesn't change itself, no doubt, and it's a highly complex chain of four ingredients, four letters, if you will, in different innumerable combinations. But you can operate the tellurides around the nucleus as switch-on, switch-off buttons, changing and modifying the behavior. We cannot help but think that within this whole thing, some intelligence is operating. And the study of nature is most fascinating. For example, in Africa, we have meerkats. And they're quite cute little things, but they're able to stand vertically, so they're able to have a lookout. They have a language. And the language identifies whether there's an immediate danger, and there's a special sound if it's a snake. The snake is after the eggs. And it warns its other people. And if it's really in immediate, inescapable danger, gives another signal, run. And then if there's a far-off danger, such as an eagle or something of that nature, gives another signal. Studying dolphins and their language, the complexity of it with modern technology, has come up with incredibly interesting combinations of sounds. Nowadays, scientists will put models in the water, kind of fake versions of dolphins, for example, or fake versions of fish, and swimming with them, as it were, identifying their behaviors, their sounds, and everything else, and how dolphins can chase fish in a communal team effort using sounds, communicating. Please go here, please go there, moving forward. So it is not only humans, of course, that have this great intelligence. All creatures have this intelligence. All creatures, including single-celled organisms, they have this intelligence. But the degree of the intelligence depends on the degree of the manifestation of the original cause. And the original cause would be not only the efficient cause, but also the material cause. Now, the absolute, is it a causal agent? No, it's not. Not in the strict sense. The absolute is the absolute. And that's the only entity which is completely free. But when we talk about freedom, this is the only thing that can be classified as completely free. In fact, it was never bound. So when we're looking to discover this, language such as, we will attain it, or something of that nature, when we will attain our freedom, this is, of course, from the wrong perspective. It's not something to be attained. It is always there. If it is something to be attained, then we cannot classify it in any sense as free. If it's free, it's always unconditional. And that applies to every aspect. Let us take, for example, the atheists. The atheists are only half right. The atheists say there's no God. What they mean by that is that even if there is a God, it must also be something which is relative. It will appear, it will disappear. There's no permanence for it. And there must be a cause of it, and still, so it's not free. And so there's the expression in the Upanishads of, from a clump of grass to Brahma. Brahma standing for the personal God, the supreme causal agent of the familiar world that we know, through subtle elements called tanmatras, coming from itself, variations coming from itself. And we cannot say it's unreal either. It is relatively real, there's no doubt. But it's changeable, it changes. Something that is free cannot change, cannot be affected, nor can it affect. And so therefore, step by step, how we approach it. Is there any harm in manufacturing a God? Is that God unreal? It's as real or unreal as anything else. However, it is made from absolute purity. It is the highest conception of the absolute that we have to the human mind. And it is real, but still in a relative sense. So he goes on in terms of the ingress of information and its response. So he says, affections of external objects are carried by the outer instruments to their respective brain centers or organs, and the organs carry out the affections to the mind, and the mind to the determinative faculty, thereby indicating an element of free will. Because if there's a determinative faculty that can be used as an instrument, well, no doubt it is caused by something, it is determined by something, but there is an element of elasticity. There is an element of chance. As I use an example I always use, supposing you light a candle or a fire, where will the smoke go? Now, if it's a big fire and you're cooking something, you might say, it goes in my direction. Yeah, okay, but generally it's going upwards. It's lighter than air, it's a gas. But how it twists and turns this way and that way, the variables within it, almost unpredictable. So we know that there is a law of chaos going on, what we call in biological terms, stochasticity, a changeableness, an element of chance. And this has been emphasized, unreasonably so, by the biologists of the 1970s, where they promoted and still promote, and it's still something like a standard model, is this neo-Darwinism. And the neo-Darwinism is purely emphasizes not only all the other elements within evolution, but they emphasize this randomness, genetic mutation. Yes, of course there's randomness, but the cell knows how to deal with it, is the greatest discovery. And it's not that there's an internal thing that's dealing with it, manufacturing protein and making copies, some of which are erroneous. The degree of error is very small. But even if you type 1,000 million scripts and you get a certain percentage of errors, in the human typing, you get more errors than those which the cell produces. And the cell itself has a way of coping as an entire cell. The whole thing is pulsing with intelligence. So there's an inner entity whose presence makes this move and work. But let's return to beyond the determinative faculty that we call the buddhi. And from this buddhi, from this faculty, the purusha, that is the soul, receives them, and when perception results, next he gives the order back, as it were, to the motor centers to do the needful. And with the exception of the purusha, all of these are material, and the mind is much finer matter than the external instruments. That material of which the mind is composed goes also to form the subtle matter called tanmatras. These become gross and make the external matter. And you'll see almost in all the talks I give, I'm emphasizing these subtle elements as pathways, causal pathways back to this cosmic mind, this buddhi, this universal determinative faculty, which is the creative mind of the universe, God's mind, God himself, personal God. These become gross and make the external matter. That is the psychology of the Sankhya. So that between the intellect and the grosser matter outside, there is only a difference, only in degree. And the Purusha is the only thing which is immaterial. So what we are saying, the mind is an instrument. And it's not just a single instrument, it's made from different parts. It's an aggregate. And so how did we get this aggregate? These components have to be there. Changeability has to be there within the framework of time and space and causality, purely deterministic. And that framework is what keeps it bound. When you break the framework, there's freedom. Now, I said it's not something to be attained, it's something always there. The great example is the sun is there, but clouds are also there. And when the clouds are there, you cannot see the sun. It doesn't mean to say the sun is absent. It means that the clouds are there and they will shift on, and one cloud will shift another cloud. That indicates a certain deterministic methodology or self-deterministic methodology, an element of free choice. Now, I'd rather say free choice than free will, because will is entirely dependent on conditions. And choice is also dependent on conditions. At least two conditions must be there, or two choices must be there for us to choose this or that. Many more could be there. But broadly speaking, when we want to access this freedom, we have to apply this relativity. And relativity comes within the realm of delusion. Now, I mentioned atheists will have it only half right. They'll say there's no God, but by God they mean some object. And the highest being will not be an object, but the highest reading of it certainly can be an object, not external, but internal, and can be accessed. It's accessed by prayer, it's accessed by meditation, by japa, it's accessed by all the pure things and noble thoughts, a cultivation of that. It's using a technique of counter thoughts, promoting the sattva element of purity and goodness, and combating and neutralizing the others. In another text, Swami Vivekananda on this subject gives an example. He says, you see, both in Islam and Hinduism, Well, Islam have a jackal is unclean, and a dog is seen to be unclean too. And once there was a Muslim who was cooking his beautiful feast. A jackal came and ate a little bit. Now, according to his ethical customs, he cannot eat the rest. It's now become impure. He goes along to Imam, what can I do? The Imam says, well, it's unclean, you can't eat from it, but what you should do is, you should get a dog to eat a portion. And then the dog and the jackal will cancel each other, and then you can eat it. That was his reasoning. So we have to use the same kind of techniques. The Purusha is the only thing which is immaterial. And when we say Purusha, we have alternative terms for it. The Absolute, Brahman, Atman. Brahman is used in an overall absolute context. Atman is used in the context of the human. But the point is, whatever term you use, it is immaterial. Now the atheist, half right, let's give him that, but half wrong. If he says that God is a delusion, he should also say, and an illusion, he should also say this world is an illusion. This world is an illusion. Whatever is material is an illusion. It cannot be real. It must be something like a mirage in a desert. Swami Vivekananda, quoting him again, he puts this, that in his wandering days, he must have been wandering in the deserts of Rajasthan, and hungry and thirsty, and he saw many, many occasions a lake in the distance. And when he approached it, he realized it disappeared. It was a mirage. He experienced it for the first time. The second time, he wasn't duped. Second time, when he saw it, he thought, yeah, but it'll disappear. It's a mirage. Having seen the mirage and the characteristic of the mirage once, you surely not be duped a second, third, fourth time. He says the mind is an instrument, as it were, in the hands of the soul, through which the soul catches external objects. The mind is constantly changing and vacillating and can, when perfected, either attach itself to several organs or to one or to none. For instance, I hear the clock with great attention. I will not perhaps see anything, although my eyes may be open. And so he goes on like this. Now, you realize that Raja Yoga is a commentary, really, on the Patanjali Yoga Sutras. And so, if we look at the first section, explaining what is yoga, what is concentration, it comes out like this. Viparyaha mityanyanam atadrupa pratishtam. Indiscrimination is false knowledge, not established in real nature. Now, in contrast to that, what is real knowledge? Real knowledge is comprised of things like pratyaksha, it goes direct perception, anumana, inference, and agamaha, pramanani, competent evidence and proofs. Now that applies not just to the scientific world, it applies to how we evaluate things at all. What is right knowledge in any context has to have these factors. When two perceptions are don't contradict each other, we call it proof. So it goes on like that, a lengthy explanation of what that comprises. But the point is, if there is no free will, if free will is just an illusion, then how can we use this faculty, this determinative faculty, to exercise our free choice? And so we have to accept it provisionally as a kind of experience that we have. We have the experience of it. If you ask anybody, just without examining in any great depth, do you feel that you have a free choice? They'll say, yes. I chose what I ate for supper this evening. I chose how to come here. I chose to use a bicycle. I chose many things. It was free choice. Yeah, okay, examine closely. There must have been a bicycle. There wasn't a car. There must have been the capacity to move, the capacity to pedal. And so there's all a chain of causality which determined that you got here as you got here. However, there is an element of leeway, a determinative faculty, where you can choose, but it's still within the relative world, and strictly speaking, yes, it's an illusion because the deterministic law is there. However, the leeway is we have to work within the framework of illusion to overcome it. So we have at least got to choose between one or two things. Sreyascha priyascha manusyam etastau samparitya vivinakti diraha shreyo hi diro bi prayaso prayomando yogakshema vriniti. Both the good, that is shreyas, and the pleasant, prayash, approach a person. The wise person, pondering over them, discriminates, uses the faculty. The wise chooses the good in preference to the pleasant, and the simple-minded, for the sake of worldly being, prefers the pleasant. Mandaha, the simple-minded. And oxen are happy when they have peas to eat, is a statement by the Greek Heraclitus. For the best people choose one thing above all else, immortal glory above transient things. So we get this understanding of morality, that something is good and something is not good. And Shankaracharya distinguishes between the elimination of faults and the acquisition of virtues, which are the results of karma. The contemplation of the divine is jnana. Now, this law of karma, therefore, is a law of causation and has to be considered in terms of where we are now and how we manage our destiny. So the doctrine of karma, or the doctrine of most people take it as rebirth in that sense, it forms an important part of our Vedantic literature, namely Upanishads, and has exerted its great practical influence on all of us. But it must be clearly understood that this doctrine, and it is a doctrine, it's not an essential part. We can take it or leave it, because what's the point of dwelling on it if it's in the past? Except where it sits now in an evaluation of what mark did it leave and what is the opportunity I have, knowing it, to make a correction and to determine what path I will take. So, from a psychology point of view, you might say as well, I have to include this, you might say that moral behavior, from a modern psychology point of view, can depend on many other factors. The example of your parents, the condition you were brought up in, whether you were brought up in poverty or otherwise. Your various attitudes will determine how you'll proceed. That's their argument. But they ignore the fact that there is something that transcends psychology. They're ignoring this energetic thrust within us, manifested from a cosmic mind that comes to us and has a characteristic of love. But anyway, that aside, we have to clearly understand that the soul, or the Atman, or the Purusha as we mentioned, according to the yogis, its true nature is beyond birth and death. It's unaffected by time, by space, and the law of causation, and it is a law. It has a reference only to the jiva, and you can see without these 3-4 components, the whole of life comes to a standstill. If there's no sense of time and motion, then how can we operate within it? And then if there's no space, all objects are gone. And if there's no causation, then we cannot trace at least a little bit back and ask the question, why, even in a scientific sense. Why is a causation question? Now, why, in a psychological way, is a meaningless question. Why not? What next is a better way? So it has referenced this karma only to the jiva. or the embodied soul. That is the soul that is caught within this illusion of time and space causation. And it belongs to what is called the inferior knowledge, what's called aparavidya. And this lower knowledge enables a person to seek to explain the relative world in front of us. It has its use, but it's nothing to do with the superior knowledge called paravidya. That's called the science of the Atman. But karma literally means something else. It really literally means action. Kra comes from kra. It denotes both action in general and also the effects, the fruit that is produced. And it's produced from subtle impressions in the unconscious mind. And these impressions remain with the doer even after an action is outwardly accomplished. There's an echo of it. It's part of our learning behavior of how to cope with a relative changing world. So the law of karma is really the application of the law of cause and effect in the moral world. Supposing you say everything is fully determined, like the strong determinist, let's say the Calvinist, then strictly speaking, nobody's responsible for anything. All moral values have gone. You're dragged before the court. Why did you murder this person? It was destiny. You see, I believe I'm a determinist. See, there's no exercise of flexibility in me. So the law of karma is the application of the law of cause and effect in the moral world, and no action is exhausted without producing its effect, both on the body and on the mind. And at the time of death, the actions of a person just remain in a seed form and they get carried over into a suitable environment, physical environment, material environment around you. And the seeds develop when you assume a new body, either on earth or in any other plane of existence, not just on the earth. So every person is born in the world fashioned by himself or herself. That's an important concept. It removes any doubt or question. Why am I born in this condition? Well, there's a cause. What was the cause? Yeah, before you were born, there was a cause. Before you were born in this condition. Good and evil are laid down on the scales in the world beyond. And whichever of the two sinks down, that you will follow, whether it's good or evil. He who does good will be born as good. He who does evil will be born as evil. He becomes holy by holy deeds, evil by evil deeds. So therefore, there's an incentive to be good, even if it's a selfish incentive. A person is altogether and throughout composed of desire. Karma is the driving force. And karma means that there is some formula I wish to develop, which is purely in the self-deterministic world. I want to do something for myself. But even there, if you trace it back, it comes from a primitive need to survive. And if you trace it back even more, there's a wonderfully transcendent cause. And that is existence, being itself. Once you apply time and space and causation and also function, you apply these things, then the sense of being comes out as self-preservation. Even in this it comes out. So, in truth, a person is altogether thoroughly and throughout composed of this series of desires. And in proportion to that desire, so is his direction, his kratu. And in proportion to his discretion, so he performs acts, karma. And karma in this sense means purifying acts. And in proportion to his acts, so does it result in him. It's a very thorough justification for conditions we find ourselves in. Because we ourselves are the cause of our own happiness and our own suffering. It's not caused by any external agency. Now it's important then that we go on with what Swami Vivekananda says about free will. He says, it is only when the infinite existence comes, as it were, into this network of Maya that it takes the form of will. Will is a portion of that being caught in the network of Maya, and therefore free will is actually a misnomer. It means nothing, and it's sheer nonsense. So is all this talk about freedom. There's no freedom in Maya. Everyone is as much bound in thought, word, and deed, and mind as a piece of stone or a table. That I talk to you now, he says, because it's a lecture, is as rigorous in causation as that you listen to me. There is no freedom until you go beyond Maya. That's the real freedom of the soul. Men, however sharp and intellectual, however clearly they see the force of the logic that nothing here can be free, are all compelled to think they are free. And if you're compelled to think you are free, free will is an illusion. But it's a useful one. They cannot help it. No work can go on until we begin to say we are free. It means that the freedom we talk about is the glimpse of the blue sky through the clouds, and that the real freedom, the blue sky itself, is behind. True freedom, he says, cannot exist in the midst of this delusion, this hallucination, this nonsense of the world, this universe of the senses, body, and mind. All these dreams without beginning or end, uncontrolled and uncontrollable, ill-adjusted, broken, inharmonious, form our idea of this universe. In a dream, when you see a giant with 20 heads chasing you and you're flying from him, you don't think it is inharmonious. You think it is proper and right. So is this law. All that you call law is simply chance without meaning. And in this dream state, you call it law. Within Maya, so far as this law of time, space, and causation exists, there's no freedom. And all these various forms of worship are within this Maya. It's not saying give up the worship, but understand that it is there. Even if you don't understand it now, you will grow out of it. The idea of God and the ideas of brute and of man are within this Maya, and as such are equally hallucinations. All of them are dreams. But you must take care not to argue like some extraordinary men of whom we hear at the present time. They say the idea of God is a delusion, but the idea of the world is true. Both ideas stand or fall by the same logic. He alone has the right to be an atheist who denies this world as well as the other. Both. The same argument is for both. The same massive delusion extends from God to the lowest animal, from a blade of grass to the Creator. And so the same person who sees falsity in the idea of God ought also, he must be able to see it in the idea of his own body or his own mind. When God vanishes, then also the body and mind vanish. When God vanishes, that happens. The real existence, what is the real existence? It remains forever. It comes down into our realm of time and space or concept for the good of us. It's me talking, not the text. There he quotes Upanishads. There the eyes cannot go, nor the speech, nor the mind. We cannot see it, neither know it. And we now understand that so far as speech and thought and knowledge and intellect go, it is within this Maya. It is within bondage. Beyond that is reality. Then neither thought, nor mind, nor speech can reach. So, intellectually you're right, he goes on, and then he describes how to get out of it. Now, this now comes to the techniques of yoga. How will you do it? But we have to talk boldly, and Swami Vivekananda is not shy to do so. He says, it is not that you become this Brahman. You are already that. It's not that you're going to become God or perfect. You're already perfect. Whenever you think that you are not, it's a delusion. This delusion, which says that you are Mr. So-and-so and Mrs. So-and-so, can be got rid of by another delusion. That is called practice. What is practice? How do we get out of this? We get out of this by practice. Practice of what? Practice of this sense of discernment, the sense of discrimination, which distinguishes what is real or what is unreal, and then renunciation with it. Vairagya. Viveka and Vairagya. All the paths require it, this sense of renunciation. So who are fit to become any of the yogis, let's say the jnana yogis, those who are equipped with these requisites. First, renunciation of all fruits of work, of all enjoyments, and so on and so forth. Whichever path you take, renunciation is necessary. Now, what renunciation is done by the worshippers of God, the bhakti yogis, they renounce all their little loves for the greater love. What happens with the karma yogis? They renounce the fruits of all their activities. What happens to the jnana yogis? They renounce everything which is not permanent and real. That's not to say that they reject the world, but they accept it as a relative reality. What do the Raja yogis do? They also renounce that which is not stable, that which is not permanent. So this renunciation is a key. But how to renounce? We have to persuade ourselves first that this world is something like an illusion, and anything within it will be in the realm of delusion. Let us see further what Swami Vivekananda may have to say on this. This idea of will has been the cornerstone of both the Buddhist and the Vedantic system, and later on has penetrated into German philosophy, forms the basis of Schopenhauer's system of philosophy. And so all of this comes into the realm of causal law, including what we call reincarnation. And Swami Vivekananda says, the free will and determinist, this is not him saying it, but the free will and determinism debate is an unnecessary philosophical debate. Because it addresses the extent to which factors outside our control influence our behavior. And the whole issue has been exaggerated as an either-or scenario. There's scope for both the use of apparent free will and also the acceptance of a causal law, a deterministic law. Both are necessary. But hard determinism will be difficult. And then the other aspect of acceptance of free will unconditionally will also be extreme. Proponents of free will argue that while external factors can influence our behavior, humans ultimately decide how and whether to respond to these factors. And then there are some examples. If a poor person steals because they have no money to feed themselves, the free will position argues that they still decided to steal, despite the external factors, for example, poverty. So the decision to steal or not was their own. But you see, the deterministic point of view could be like this, that they would argue that being born into a low-income family is an environmental constraint. And stealing food is not a choice made out of a free will, but out of a need created by poverty. And poverty is the cause, and the stealing is the consequence. Two ways of looking at the same problem. But you can look at it through the lens of soft determinism. And we can say that they would argue that being born into a low-income family is an environmental constraint, but choosing to steal is an example of free will. And that's true when other options exist, such as borrowing money or receiving support from the government, etc. So both are there. But we have to insert in reality the idea of true freedom being belonging to the source, the Purusha, the Atman, Brahman. That's it. And everything else is as much a manipulation, a variable manipulation in a relative world. And we have to, in practice, apply it, even though it seems to be an illusion. Well, I think that's enough, probably, to fill your heads with nonsense. So it's all right. Why are we bringing the subject up at all, of course, is an interesting question. We bring the subject up for two reasons. Firstly, to properly evaluate the vacillating world in front of us and to distinguish that there is a world, what we call a world is actually mithya. It's an appearance. We cannot take it seriously. We cannot take it truly. And when it comes home to us, it's like Swami Vivekananda realizing that all other experiences are the mirage. First experience was novel. Even before the experience, it wasn't taken to be in any way a mirage. And then he experienced it as a mirage. And then he never fell into the trap again. And the second reason why we're discussing it is that the method for changing it is producing the opposite. In other words, two waves come up, one we call rajas, one we call tamas. And what is the technique? We have to use our free will to choose the right path, or apparent free will to use we can call it free choice is better, to choose the right course of action, and then do it determinately so that it involves self-discipline, it involves cultivating the will, exercising an element of strength, and exercising an area of selflessness. Every other action being selfish. Selfish means I get a real result from all my actions and thoughts in this world, and I'm the beneficiary. So, by raising the opposite kind of waves, we understand that this is the technique. There's a stanza there, or I should say an aphorism there, a sutra there from Patanjali. He says like this, he says that the technique is by raising the opposite. In other words, if you have a habit in the habit level, how do you change it? Is to cultivate another counter habit. And this is what I described as the game of life, where we assess how many negatives, how many things are against us, and then cause a temporary amnesty, and then insert something of our own, so that ultimately the nobility and truth and goodness and harmony prevails. That then becomes the formation of a new habit. And when the new habit is fully formed, the knowledge of the reality of existence also dawns on us. And the revelation is there. I was free all the time. I didn't have to become free. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thanks.
Thank you. Merci. Au revoir.
Okay, au revoir.
Thank you, Swami.
Good.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Good, good.